Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
In the deepest heart of the imperial palace, buried beneath layers of adamantium and ancient stone, beneath the watchful gaze of 10,000 golden guardians, sits the most important corpse in the galaxy. For more than 100 centuries, the master of mankind has remained upon the golden throne of Earth. He is neither alive nor truly dead, existing in a state that defies every natural law of the universe. His body, once mighty and radiant with power that could shake worlds, has withered to something barely recognizable as human. Flesh has turned to parchment stretched over ancient bones. Limbs that once wielded weapons capable of slaying gods have atrophied to skeletal remnants. Yet still, that terrible will endures, holding back forces that would devour humanity whole. Every single day, 1,000 psychers are brought before the golden throne. They come from every corner of the Imperium, gathered by the black ships in a harvest that never ends. These souls, born with the curse and gift of psychic power, are led into the throne room in chains. They know their fate. They have always known. Some go willingly, viewing their sacrifice as the highest honor. Others must be dragged, screaming and pleading, toward the device that will consume them utterly. The process is efficient, refined over 10 millennia of practice. One by one, these psychers are drained of their life force, their very essence fed into the mechanisms of the Golden Throne, to sustain the Emperor's flickering existence for just one more day. This is the price of humanity's survival. This is the terrible bargain that keeps the Imperium functioning. But without these daily sacrifices, the Emperor would fade completely. Without his psychic might channeled through the throne's archaeotech systems, the Astronomicon would go dark. Without the Astronomicon, interstellar travel would become nearly impossible across vast swathes of the galaxy. Without faster-than-light travel, the Imperium would fragment into 1,000,000 isolated worlds, each alone in the darkness, easy prey for the horrors that wait in the void. The entire edifice of human civilization across 1,000,000 worlds rests upon this single point of failure, this one irreplaceable being whose existence grows more tenuous with each passing year. But what if that existence finally ended? What if, after 10,000 years of suffering, after 100 centuries of unimaginable agony, the Emperor's will finally broke? What if the Golden Throne, that ancient and failing machine, finally gave out completely? What if the daily sacrifice of 1,000 souls proved insufficient to sustain him for even one more day? What if the master of mankind, the being who united terror and conquered the stars, who built an empire spanning the galaxy, finally died? The question haunts the nightmares of every person in the Imperium who knows the truth. The custodian guard, standing eternal vigil in the throne room, never speak of this possibility aloud, yet it dominates their every thought. The High Lords of Terror, playing their political games in the halls above, know that all their power and authority derives from a being whose grasp on existence grows weaker each year. The Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests who maintain the Golden Throne work with increasing desperation, yet knowing that systems 10,000 years old are failing one by one, and their knowledge to repair them has been lost to time. Even the common citizens of the Imperium, who know nothing of the Golden Throne or the Emperor's true state, can sense that something fundamental is wrong. Their prayers seem to echo into a void that grows deeper each day. The Emperor's death would not be a simple matter of one man dying. It would be a cosmic event with consequences that would reshape the entire galaxy. The psychic scream of his passing would echo through the warp, heard by every psyker from the brightest to the weakest. Demons would howl in triumph. Entire populations would go mad from the psychic backlash. Reality itself would shudder at the extinction of a being who has become something far more than human, in something approaching godhood whether he wished it or not. The death of the Emperor would be the death of an era, the end of the Imperium as it has existed for 10 millennia, and potentially the beginning of the end for humanity itself. Yet death might not be the final word in this story. The Emperor is no ordinary being, and his relationship with death has never been straightforward. Ancient lore speaks of his previous incarnations, of how he has existed since before recorded history, reborn again and again through the ages of mankind. Some whisper that his death might not be an ending, but a transformation, that the being who has sat immobile on the golden throne might shed that ruined body like a snake sheds dead skin, emerging as something new and terrible and glorious. Others believe his soul would battle the chaos gods themselves in the realm of the warp, becoming a fifth god to stand against the four, a god of order and reason against the powers of madness and entropy. But these are speculations, dreams and nightmares spun by those who cannot bear to imagine a universe without the Emperor's presence, however diminished it might be. The reality could be far simpler and far more terrible. The Emperor might simply die, his soul dissipating into the warp like any other, his 10,000-year struggle ending not in apotheosis, but in simple failure. Humanity would be left orphaned, leaderless, and facing threats on every side without the one being who had always been their ultimate guardian and guide. To understand what the Emperor's death would truly mean, we must first understand what keeps him alive now, what functions he performs even in his current state, and why his existence has become so absolutely vital to humanity's survival that 1,000 souls are sacrificed daily just to sustain it for one more dawn. The Golden Throne was never meant to be a life support system. When it was first constructed during the height of the Great Crusade, it served an entirely different purpose, one far more ambitious and ultimately more tragic than merely sustaining a single life, even one as important as the Emperor's. The throne was built as the control mechanism for the Emperor's greatest work, a project that would have revolutionized humanity's relationship with warp travel and potentially ended the species' dependence on navigators forever. It was the key to the Webway project. The Elder, an ancient race that had once dominated the galaxy before their own fall into decadence and horror, had created a network of tunnels through the warp, stable passages that allowed instant travel across vast distances without exposure to the raw chaos of the Imperium. The Webway was a marvel of psycho-architectural engineering, a dimension unto itself that existed between real space and the warp, protected from the predations of demons and the madness of chaos. The Emperor, in his infinite ambition and understanding, sought to replicate and expand this technology. He planned to connect every human world through the Webway, creating an empire that would be immune to the dangers of warp travel. An empire where psychers would no longer be necessary for navigation, yet where the forces of chaos could be starved of the very attention that gave them power. The Emperor had worked on this project in secret for years, hidden away beneath the imperial palace on Terra. He had been so close to success, so tantalizingly near to achieving a goal that would have secured humanity's future for all time. Then Magnus the Red, the Primarch of the 1,000 Suns, had shattered everything in a single catastrophic moment. Magnus, that most psychically gifted of all the Primarchs, had become aware of Horus's betrayal and the great heresy that was about to tear the Imperium apart. In his desperation to warn his father, Magnus had done the one thing the Emperor had explicitly forbidden. He had used sorcery on a massive scale, tearing through the psychic wards that protected the Webway project, smashing through barriers that the Emperor had spent decades constructing. The damage was instantaneous and catastrophic. The human-built section of the Webway, still fragile and incomplete, was breached in multiple places. Demons poured through the gaps, flooding into the tunnels, racing toward Terror itself. The Emperor had been forced to abandon all his other work, to seat himself upon the Golden Throne and use his own psychic might to hold the breach closed. What was meant to be a temporary measure became permanent. The Horus heresy erupted across the galaxy, and the Emperor could not leave his post, not even to lead his armies against his most beloved son turned traitor. He directed the war from his throne, but his attention had to remain divided. Now always part of his consciousness dedicated to keeping the webway gate sealed against the demon hordes that pressed against it from the other side. Then came the final confrontation aboard Horus's battle barge, the Vengeful Spirit. The Emperor had teleported to the ship with his most trusted warriors, including his custodian guard and the Primarchs Rogel Dawn and Sanguinius. The battle had been apocalyptic, with Sanguinius falling to Horus before the Emperor arrived. When father and son finally met, the Emperor had still hoped to redeem Horus, to bring his wayward son back from the brink of damnation. That mercy had nearly cost him everything. Horus, fully possessed by the powers of all four Chaos gods, had struck the Emperor down with terrible force. Only when the Emperor saw his favored son, a mere mortal caught in the psychic crossfire, flayed alive by Horus's power, did he finally understand that nothing remained of the son he had loved. With that realization came the decision to end it, and the Emperor had unleashed the full might of his psychic power, obliterating Horus's soul so completely that even the Chaos gods could not reconstitute it. But the cost was enormous. The Emperor's body had been shattered, wounded so grievously that even his phenomenal regenerative abilities could not heal the damage. His loyal sons had retrieved him and brought him back to Terra, back to the Golden Throne that had been his prison for years. Now it became his permanent prison, his life support system, the only thing standing between him and death. On the mechanisms that had been designed to channel his power for the Webway project were hastily repurposed to sustain his failing body. The tech priests of Mars worked with desperate speed to modify and expand the throne's systems, adding layer upon layer of life support technology, some of it barely understood even by those who installed it. The Golden Throne itself is a device that defies easy description. Portions of it are clearly human in origin, built with the technology of the dark age of technology, that lost golden era when humanity's scientific knowledge reached heights that seem like magic to the present age. Other components are utterly alien, scavenged or adapted from Eldar technology, their purpose and function only dimly understood by the Mechanicus priests who maintain them. And still other parts have been added over the millennia, crude by comparison to the ancient systems, but necessary to keep the whole functioning. The result is a chaotic melange of technologies from different eras and different species, all working together in ways that should be impossible, held together as much by the Emperor's own psychic will as by any physical mechanism. 10,000 years have passed since the Emperor was interred upon the Golden Throne. 10,000 years of constant operation, of systems that were never designed to run indefinitely, being pushed far beyond their limits. The throne requires constant maintenance, constant repair, constant adjustment to keep functioning. The Adeptus Mechanicus has assigned their finest tech priests to this duty. I have an entire order dedicated solely to the preservation of the throne and its precious occupant. These tech priests work in shifts that never end, monitoring systems, replacing components that fail, performing rituals that are equal parts scientific procedure and religious ceremony. They know that a single mistake, a single oversight, could result in catastrophic failure. And the throne is failing. Despite all their efforts, despite all their prayers and sacred oils and desperate improvisations, the Golden Throne grows less stable with each passing year. Systems that once functioned flawlessly now require constant adjustment. Components that should last centuries now burn out in decades or years. The tech priests have noticed the acceleration, the way problems that once appeared occasionally now manifest with increasing frequency. They have tried to halt the deterioration, to reverse it, but their knowledge is incomplete. The secrets of the throne's construction were lost long ago, and what remains is more art than science, more faith than understanding. The most terrifying aspect is that no one knows how much time remains. The Golden Throne might function for another 10,000 years, or it might fail tomorrow. Every day that the Emperor survives is a day borrowed against an inevitable reckoning. The tech priests run calculations, trying to predict the timeline of failure, but the variables are too numerous and too uncertain. All they know for certain is that the time is drawing near, that the Emperor's final death is not a matter of if, but when. The daily sacrifice of psykers has become both blessing and curse. On one hand, that the raw psychic energy fed into the Golden Throne has extended the Emperor's existence far beyond what should have been possible. These souls provide the fuel that keeps his psychic presence anchored to his ruined body, that allows him to continue projecting the Astronomicon and holding the webway breach sealed. On the other hand, the requirements have been increasing. 1,000 psykers per day was sufficient for millennia, but recent decades have seen that number creeping upward. Sometimes 1,100 are needed, sometimes 1,200. The increase is slight enough that it could be statistical variance, or it could be a sign that the Emperor's hold on life is weakening, that he requires more and more spiritual fuel to maintain the same functions. The black ships continue their eternal harvest, scouring the Imperium for those born with psychic gifts. Most psykers are too weak or too unstable to serve in other capacities. They are gathered up and transported to Terra in their thousands, kept in suspension until their time comes. The process has become so routine, so systematized, that it's easy to forget that each of those 1,000 daily sacrifices is a person, an individual with thoughts and feelings and a life that is ending to feed a being most of them will never see. Some go to their deaths with joy, believing the imperial propaganda that paints the emperor as a god and their sacrifice as the highest possible honor. Others go in terror, having seen through the lies, knowing they're being fed to a corpse god who might not even be aware of their existence. The throne room itself is a place of terrible grandeur. The Golden Throne sits at the center of a vast chamber, surrounded by banks of machinery that stretch away into shadows. The Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guard, stand watch in their gleaming auramite armor, 10,000 strong. They have not left their post in 10 millennia. They have seen generations of tech priests come and go, have watched as the Emperor's body has withered from the magnificent form he once possessed to the skeletal remnant that exists now. The custodians are perhaps the only beings in the Imperium who truly understand the Emperor's current state, who see him not as he was, or as propaganda portrays him, but as he actually is. They know every labored breath he takes, every flutter of his withered eyelids, every minute sign that distinguishes life from death in that ravaged form, and they know, though they would never speak it aloud, that the end is coming. When the Golden Throne finally fails, when the mechanisms that have sustained the Emperor for 10,000 years finally give their last, the consequences will ripple outward from terror at the speed of thought. The first to know will be those in the throne room itself, the custodians and tech priests who will see the readouts flatline, who will watch as the Emperor's psychic presence, that vast and terrible consciousness that has endured beyond all mortal limits, finally extinguishes like a candle flame. They will have only moments to process what has happened before the second shoe drops, before they realize that the Emperor's death is not an isolated event, but the trigger for catastrophes that will engulf the galaxy. The Astronomicon, that great psychic beacon that makes interstellar navigation possible across most of the Imperium, is powered by the Emperor's psychic might channeled through the Golden Throne. The moment his consciousness fails, the Astronomicon goes dark. For the first time in 10,000 years, the light that has guided humanity through the warp will vanish. The effect will not be instantaneous across the galaxy due to the vagaries of warp travel and the way time functions differently in the Imperium, but it will spread with terrifying speed. Ships in transit will find their navigators suddenly blind, unable to see the Astronomicon's light that has been their reference point. Some will emerge from the warp safely, though far from their intended destinations. Others will be lost forever, was trapped in the tides of chaos, or torn apart by the denizens of that hellish realm. For the Imperium, the loss of the Astronomicon means the loss of cohesion. The galaxy is a vast place, and the Imperium spans millions of light years. Even with faster-than-light travel, it takes years for ships to traverse the distance between the Imperium's core worlds and its frontier territories. Without the Astronomicon, those journey times increase exponentially. Some routes become impassable. Some regions become completely cut off, isolated in the darkness. The Imperium begins to fragment almost immediately, not by choice, but by simple logistical reality. Sector governors find themselves unable to communicate with Terra, unable to receive reinforcements or supplies, are forced to make decisions on their own without guidance from the central authority they have always relied upon. The fragmentation creates opportunities for every enemy humanity has. Chaos cultists, who have been waiting for such a moment, activate sleeper cells across thousands of worlds. Genestealer cults rise up, knowing that Imperial reinforcements won't be coming. Xenos empires that have been held in check by the Imperium's might suddenly find their enemies disorganized and vulnerable. The careful balance that has kept humanity's enemies at bay begins to collapse, and the Imperium finds itself fighting wars on every front simultaneously, with no way to coordinate a unified response. But all of this pales in comparison to what happens at the Imperium's very heart, on Terra itself. The moment the Emperor dies, or the webway breach that he has been holding closed for 10,000 years tears open. The demons that have been pressing against that barrier, probing it constantly for weaknesses, sensing the vast concentration of human souls on the other side, finally find their way through. They pour into the Imperial Palace in their millions, a tide of warp spawn that no amount of physical defenses can stop. The Adeptus Custodes, 10,000 of the greatest warriors humanity has ever produced, immediately move to contain the breach. They have prepared for this possibility, have plans and contingencies that have been refined over millennia. But even they know that this is a battle they cannot win. The demons keep coming, an endless tide that requires no logistics, no supply lines, no rest. For every demon the custodians slay, 10 more take its place. The Golden Warriors fight with skill and courage that would bring tears to the eyes of anyone who witnessed it. But courage alone cannot hold back the warp. The Imperial Palace, seat of humanity's government for 10,000 years, becomes a war zone. Halls that have stood inviolate since the age of the Great Crusade are overrun with screaming horrors from beyond reality. Chambers where the High Lords of Terror have debated policy are filled with demonic laughter and the stench of corruption. The custodians fall back layer by layer, sealing bulkheads, collapsing corridors, doing everything they can to slow the demon advance. They know they're buying time, not achieving victory, but that time might be crucial for what comes next. The tech priests in the throne room will attempt to salvage something from the disaster. Some will argue for trying to restart the Golden Throne, to somehow restore its function, even without the Emperor's psychic might to power it. Others will seek to recover the Emperor's body itself, believing that even in death, it might hold secrets or power that could be useful. Still others will simply try to escape with whatever knowledge they can carry, knowing that the throne room will soon be overrun and that their duty to the machine god requires they preserve what lore they can for future generations. The High Lords of Terror will face their own crisis of authority. For 10,000 years, they have ruled in the Emperor's name, deriving their legitimacy from the fact that they serve as his regents during his incapacitation. With the Emperor dead, that claim to authority evaporates. Some High Lords will try to maintain order, to assert that the Imperium continues regardless of the Emperor's physical state. Others will see an opportunity for personal advancement, a chance to seize real power rather than merely administering it in another's name. The High Lord's Council Chamber, where bureaucrats have squabbled over policy for millennia, will become the site of political maneuvering that makes their previous intrigues look like children's games. But the High Lord's political struggles will seem insignificant compared to the chaos erupting across Terra itself. The Emperor's death will become known to the wider population within hours. Some will learn from official announcements, others will simply feel it. At a vast emptiness where there had always been a presence they never consciously recognized, but which had shaped their reality. The population of Terra numbers in the quadrillions, packed into hive cities that stretch across the entire surface of humanity's cradle world. When that many people simultaneously learn that their god is dead, the social consequences are catastrophic. Riots break out in the lower hives almost immediately. Some are expressions of grief, mobs of mourners who destroy everything around them in their anguish. Others are opportunistic, criminals and gangers seizing the moment of confusion to settle old scores and expand their territories. Still others are organized, chaos cults that have been waiting generations for this moment, now rising up to spread their corruption while the Imperium reels. The Arbites and local defense forces try to maintain order, but they're overwhelmed by the scale of the unrest. Entire hive sections go dark as riots spread, fires consuming hab blocks, bodies piling up in streets that have known relative peace for centuries. The Adeptus Ministorum, the ecclesiarchy, faces an existential crisis. For 10,000 years, they have preached that the emperor is a god, that he watches over humanity and guides them even from his throne. They have built an entire theology around his divinity, have constructed elaborate rituals and doctrines that explain his nature and his relationship to mankind. The revelation that he was mortal after all, that he could die like any man despite his godlike powers, shatters the foundations of imperial faith. Some preachers will try to spin the narrative, claiming that the emperor has ascended to a higher plane, that his death was actually apotheosis. Others will fall into despair, their entire worldview collapsing. Still others will see heresy in every direction, turning on each other in furious theological debates that quickly become violent. The Sisters of Battle, the ecclesiarchy's chamber militant, will face their own crisis of faith. These women have dedicated their entire existence to serving the emperor as a god. They have performed miracles in his name, witnessed living saints who channeled his divine power. With his death, they must reconcile what they have experienced with the reality that their god could die. Some will cling more fiercely to their faith, interpreting the emperor's death through the lens of sacrifice and resurrection mythology. Others will be shaken to their core, questioning everything they have believed and done in his name. The psychic backlash of the emperor's death will be felt most acutely by those with the gift and curse of psychic sensitivity. Every psyker in the galaxy, from the mightiest to the weakest, will feel the emperor's passing as a psychic scream that tears through the warp. For those near Terra, the effect is immediately lethal. Psykers' heads explode, their brains unable to process the psychic trauma. Their souls are ripped from their bodies and drawn into the warp, where they're immediately devoured by waiting demons. For those farther away, the effect is less instantly fatal, but no less traumatic. Astropaths go blind and deaf, their ability to communicate through the warp severed by the psychic static of the emperor's death. His sanctioned psykers lose control of their powers, becoming conduits for demonic possession, or simply burning out in explosions of uncontrolled psychic energy. The specific responses of individual Space Marine chapters to the Emperor's death reveal the diversity within what might seem from outside to be a monolithic institution. Each chapter has its own culture, its own traditions, its own relationship with the Emperor and the Imperium. These differences will become critical when the central authority that has loosely unified them disappears. The Dark Angels, First Legion, and one of the most secretive chapters will face their own internal crisis that compounds the larger catastrophe. This chapter has spent 10,000 years hunting the fallen, those members of their legion who turned traitor during the Horus Heresy. The Inner Circle, and the secret organization within the chapter that knows the truth about the fallen, has always justified their obsessive hunt by reference to the Emperor's judgment. With the Emperor dead, some Dark Angels might question whether the hunt remains justified, or whether it's time to reveal the truth and seek reconciliation with the fallen. This internal debate could split the chapter, with traditionalists insisting the hunt must continue and reformists arguing for a new approach. The Blood Angels and their successor chapters face unique challenges due to their genetic curse, the Black Rage and Red Thirst, inherited from their Primarch Sanguinius's death at Horus's hands. The Emperor's death might trigger unprecedented waves of the Black Rage as the psychic trauma resonates with the flaw built into their gene seed. Thought entire companies might fall to the rage simultaneously, becoming berserk killers who can no longer distinguish friend from foe. The Blood Angels have always managed this curse through ritual and faith, through meditation on their Primarch's sacrifice and their duty to the Emperor. Without those spiritual anchors, the curse might become unmanageable, potentially dooming these chapters to extinction or transformation into something monstrous. The Space Wolves, proud sons of Fenris, who have always maintained a degree of independence from the broader Imperium, might adapt more easily than others. Their culture has never been as centered on the Emperor personally as on the ideal of defending humanity and honoring their oaths. They might reframe their purpose, or continuing to hunt the enemies of mankind, not because the Emperor commands it, but because their honor demands it. The Space Wolves' less centralized organization and more individualistic culture might actually prove advantageous in the chaos following the collapse of central authority, allowing them to make decisions and take actions without waiting for approval from distant superiors who no longer exist. The Iron Hands, obsessed with the weakness of flesh and the strength of the machine, might see the Emperor's death as ultimate proof of their philosophy. Even the most powerful flesh fails eventually, they will say, but the machine endures. This might drive them to even greater extremes of augmentation, perhaps even attempting to upload their consciousness entirely into machines, and abandoning the flesh that failed their father so completely. Other chapters would view this as heresy, but the Iron Hands have never cared much for others' opinions, and without imperial authority to restrain them, they might pursue their cybernetic apotheosis regardless of what others think. The Salamanders, known for their compassion and their protection of civilian populations, will find their values tested as never before.
I've got to be honest with y'all, this scenario haunts me more than any other in 40k. The Emperor's death represents something deeply personal about the setting for me. It's the moment when humanity has to face the consequences of building everything around a single point of failure. What strikes me most is how it mirrors real historical collapses, how civilizations throughout human history have fallen when they became too dependent on one system, one leader, one idea. Games Workshop has created something truly special here, a universe where even asking what if questions leads you down rabbit holes of philosophy and human nature. That's why I keep making these videos and why I hope you keep watching them. But anyways, let's continue the video.
The chaos following the Emperor's death will create enormous suffering among civilian populations, more than any chapter could possibly address, even if they devoted all their resources to humanitarian aid. The Salamanders will have to make impossible choices about who to save and who to abandon, decisions that will haunt them, but which they will make, because their core values give them no other option. Yet their example might inspire other chapters to prioritize civilian protection, or it might isolate them as others focus purely on military objectives. The Raven Guard, masters of stealth and guerrilla warfare, might find their skills particularly valuable in the post-Emperor galaxy. As the Imperium fragments and Chaos or Xenos forces occupy former Imperial worlds, the Raven Guard could operate behind enemy lines, organizing resistance movements and conducting sabotage operations. Their decentralized operating procedures and emphasis on independent thinking will serve them well when coordination with higher command becomes impossible. They might become something like legendary freedom fighters, appearing wherever humanity is oppressed, striking from the shadows and vanishing before their enemies can respond. The White Scars, and sons of Jagatai Khan, known for their speed and independence, might embrace a nomadic existence in the post-Emperor galaxy. Their fleet-based lifestyle and cultural emphasis on freedom and movement make them natural candidates to become protectors of trade routes and refugees. They might range across vast territories, never settling in one place long enough to be pinned down by enemies or dragged into local politics, offering their services where needed and moving on when the crisis passes. This lifestyle would honor their primarch's values while allowing them to continue serving humanity in meaningful ways. The Imperial Fists and their successor chapters, particularly the Black Templars, will struggle with the meaning of their eternal crusade. The Imperial Fists have served as the Praetorians of Terror for 10,000 years, our standing guard over humanity's cradle. The Emperor's death might be interpreted as their ultimate failure, or as the completion of a duty that has finally, mercifully ended. The Black Templars, who have never accepted the Codex Astartes and have maintained a perpetual crusade since the Horus Heresy, might intensify their zealotry to unprecedented levels. They might declare a new crusade of vengeance, seeking to punish everyone and everything they can blame for the Emperor's death, or they might fracture as individual marshals interpret their duty differently. The Ultramarines and their numerous successor chapters will likely attempt to preserve order and continuity wherever possible. Robert Guilliman's return has already given them active leadership from their Primarch, and his practical, as administrative mindset might allow him to build a functional successor state from the chaos. The Ultramarines' emphasis on following the Codex Astartes and their experience governing the realm of Ultramar make them uniquely suited to maintaining civilization in the post-Emperor era. They might become the nucleus of a new human civilization, smaller than the Imperium, but more rationally organized and less devoted to dogma. The differences between chapters might lead to conflicts that would have been unthinkable before the Emperor's death. Space Marines from different chapters have fought each other before, but usually over specific disputes or due to chaos corruption. In the post-Emperor galaxy, entire chapters might war with each other over fundamental disagreements about what humanity should become or how the Emperor's legacy should be honored. These conflicts would be devastating, pitting transhuman warriors against each other in battles that leave no survivors and achieve no useful purpose beyond destroying two of humanity's most valuable assets. The specific fate of individual worlds and systems in the wake of the Emperor's death will vary enormously based on factors like their location, resources, leadership, and the particular threats they face. Examining several examples helps illustrate the range of possible outcomes and the factors that determine whether a world survives, falls, or transforms into something unexpected. Consider Armageddon, and a hive world that has already survived multiple invasions and whose population is hardened by generations of warfare. When news of the Emperor's death arrives, the world's military governor might immediately declare martial law, using the Steel Legion and local defense forces to maintain order while preparing for the orc invasions that have plagued the world repeatedly. Armageddon has sophisticated industrial capacity and a warrior culture that might allow it to survive independently or as the center of a small defensive alliance with nearby systems. However, the world's strategic importance and its history of orc attention mean it will continue to be a target, and without Imperial reinforcements, even Armageddon's formidable defenses might eventually be overwhelmed. Cadia, before its destruction, would have faced unique challenges as the fortress world guarding the Eye of Terror. The planet's entire culture was military, every citizen a soldier from birth, the whole world organized around containing the chaos forces that perpetually threatened to pour out from the warp rift. The Emperor's death would have been felt most acutely here, where faith in the Emperor and duty to the Imperium were so deeply intertwined. The Cadians might have fought even more fanatically, knowing that failure meant not just their own deaths, but the release of chaos forces into an Imperium no longer capable of mounting effective resistance. Cadia's actual destruction serves as a grim preview of what might happen to many fortress worlds when the support systems they depend on collapse. Fenris, homeworld of the Space Wolves, would likely continue much as before, at least initially. The planet's pre-industrial population and harsh environment have always made it relatively self-sufficient. The Space Wolves recruit from the native tribes and require little from the broader Imperium beyond some specialized equipment and ammunition. the chapter could maintain itself indefinitely on Fenris, though its ability to project power across the galaxy would diminish without access to Forge World production and wider Imperial logistics. Fenris might become the center of a small empire of protected worlds, systems that provide resources in exchange for Space Wolf protection, creating a miniature version of the Great Crusade-era relationship between Space Marine legions and human populations. Baal, homeworld of the Blood Angels, presents a different scenario. Says the planet is already barely habitable, a radiation-blasted wasteland where humans live in scattered tribes. The Blood Angels recruit from these tribes and maintain their fortress monastery in orbit. The chapter could continue this pattern after the Emperor's death, but the genetic curse they carry might worsen without the Emperor's subtle psychic influence moderating it. If the Blood Angels succumb entirely to the Black Rage and Red Thirst, Baal and its population might be abandoned or might fall under the control of whatever faction can fill the power vacuum. Alternatively, the Blood Angels might find new ways to manage their curse, possibly even curing it in the desperate innovation that necessity drives. Macragge and the realm of Ultramar represent perhaps the best-case scenario for Imperial worlds. And Ultramar is already a semi-autonomous region with its own government and defense forces. Robut Guillemang has returned to lead it, bringing not just his military genius, but his administrative capability and his understanding of what the Imperium was supposed to be. Ultramar might expand after the Emperor's death, incorporating neighboring systems into a new federation that maintains the best aspects of the Imperium while discarding its worst excesses. This new Ultramar could become a beacon of hope, proof that human civilization can survive and even thrive in the post-Emperor galaxy. Terra itself faces perhaps the worst fate of any Imperial world. As the cradle of humanity and the seat of the Imperium, Terra has symbolic importance beyond its strategic value. While the webway breach beneath the Imperial Palace would make the planet partially or entirely uninhabitable, at least in the regions near the breach. The population of Terra, numbering in the quadrillions, would face catastrophe on an unimaginable scale. Evacuation would be impossible for more than a tiny fraction of the population. Most would die in the demon incursions or the violence that follows as social order collapses. The planet that gave birth to humanity might become a tomb world, a monument to failed dreams and hubris. Yet even on Terra, pockets of survival might persist. The Himalayan mountains, remote hive sectors far from the palace, orbital stations and moon bases, any of these might shelter populations that survive the initial catastrophe. These survivors might eventually reclaim parts of Terra, as building new societies in the ruins of the old. Thousands of years after the Emperor's death, Terra might be home to dozens of small civilizations, each claiming to be the true inheritors of humanity's legacy, each controlling only a small portion of a planet that once governed the galaxy. Mars, the forge world of the Adeptus Mechanicus, would likely declare independence immediately upon the Emperor's death. The Mechanicus has always maintained a degree of autonomy, and without the unifying force of the Emperor, they would have no reason to submit to any successor authority. Mars controls technologies essential to human survival, giving them tremendous leverage in any negotiations with other factions. The Mechanicus might offer their services to all sides impartially, becoming arms merchants to a fragmenting humanity, or they might choose to support specific factions that align with their interests. The tech priest's response will significantly influence which successor states can maintain advanced technology and which regress to lower tech levels. Calth, the Ultramarines' secondary stronghold deep underground, would likely survive the initial chaos relatively intact. The world's subterranean cities were built to withstand attack and can support populations for extended periods without external supply. Combined with Ultramar's stability, Calth could become a center of learning and preservation, a place where knowledge is maintained and passed on to future generations, rather than being lost in the chaos. Scholars and tech priests fleeing from collapsing regions might gather at Calth. It's creating an archive of human knowledge that could help rebuild civilization eventually. Necromunda, a hive world known for its gang warfare and industrial production, would likely descend into even worse violence as imperial authority collapses. The world's government is already barely functional, maintaining control only through force and the threat of orbital bombardment. Without that threat, the gangs might expand their territories openly, turning the world into a patchwork of warring territories. Yet Necromunda's industrial capacity means it will remain strategically valuable, and various external factions might attempt to conquer or co-opt it. The resulting conflicts could devastate the population, while the gang lords play different factions against each other in pursuit of their own power. The Forge worlds scattered across the galaxy will mostly follow Mars's lead, but some might diverge based on local circumstances and the personalities of their ruling tech priests. Some Forge worlds might embrace innovation and experimentation, freed from Mars's conservative dogma. Others might become even more orthodox, clinging to tradition in the chaos. The diversity of approaches among Forge worlds could lead to technological divergence, with different regions developing different technologies based on what their local Forge worlds can or will provide. This might eventually lead to humans in different regions being equipped with substantially different technology, another factor driving cultural and political fragmentation. The agri-worlds, planets devoted entirely to food production, will become incredibly valuable in the post-Emperor galaxy. Control of food supply means control of populations, and any faction that can secure several agri-worlds will have tremendous leverage. These worlds are typically lightly defended, relying on the broader Imperium for protection. Many will be conquered early in the chaos by whatever military force reaches them first. Others might attempt to maintain independence by playing factions against each other, selling food to all sides. A few might be lucky enough to form alliances with Space Marine chapters or Navy fleets that can provide protection in exchange for a steady food supply. The Shrine worlds, planets devoted entirely to religious worship, will face existential crises as the Emperor's death forces theological reckonings. Some might become centers of new religious movements, adapting the imperial cult to acknowledge the Emperor's mortality while maintaining his divinity in some transformed sense. Others might be abandoned as faith collapses, becoming ghost worlds littered with empty cathedrals. Still others might be seized by chaos cults who pervert the religious infrastructure to their own purposes, turning shrines to the Emperor into temples of the dark gods in mockery of everything the faithful believed. The cardinal worlds, seats of religious authority in their regions, will face similar challenges, but with greater resources to address them. These worlds might attempt to become independent theocracies, with the ecclesiarchy taking direct political control justified by the spiritual emergency. Some cardinal worlds might succeed in this, was creating societies governed by religious law, where the ecclesiarchy's authority fills the void left by the Imperium's collapse. Others might face revolts from populations who reject theocratic rule, leading to religious civil wars that devastate some of humanity's most beautiful and cultured worlds. The mining worlds, extracting resources from hostile environments, will struggle as markets collapse and transportation becomes unreliable. Many of these worlds import most of their food and supplies, relying on exports of raw materials to pay for necessities. When trade networks fail, these worlds face starvation unless they can rapidly develop self-sufficiency or find new trading partners. Mining worlds that fail to adapt will be abandoned, their populations evacuating if possible or dying if not. Those that survive will likely do so by finding local partners, trading directly with nearby Forge worlds or hive worlds that can use their resources. The pleasure worlds, paradises created for the Imperium's elite to enjoy their wealth, will face revolutionary violence as the social orders that maintain them collapse. Populations that have served the wealthy in these artificial paradises will have no reason to continue that service when imperial authority vanishes. Many pleasure worlds will see their elite populations massacred by their former servants. The beautiful landscapes, they created being reclaimed or destroyed in the chaos. A few might transform peacefully into more egalitarian societies, but most will simply be destroyed, monuments to a social order that could not survive the loss of the force that maintained it. Or the death worlds, planets with environments so hostile that only the strongest survive, will likely continue much as before. These worlds produce some of the Imperium's finest soldiers precisely because their environments are so challenging. The populations might notice the Imperium's collapse primarily through the cessation of recruitment by the Imperial Guard and the end of trade. Many death worlds could survive independently, their populations already used to hardship and self-reliance. Some might even thrive, expanding to colonize neighboring systems without the Imperium's restrictive policies. The civilized worlds, planets with balanced populations and relatively high standards of living, will face the most difficult adjustments. These worlds have enjoyed the benefits of Imperial membership without experiencing the worst hardships. And their populations are educated and used to comfort, which makes them both a resource and a liability in crisis. If leadership manages the transition well, these worlds could become centers of post-imperial civilization, maintaining cultural and educational institutions that preserve humanity's heritage. If leadership fails, the same populations might panic and descend into violence, destroying in days what took centuries to build. The feral worlds, planets that have regressed to pre-industrial technology, will likely not even notice the Imperium's collapse immediately. These worlds are already isolated, visited only occasionally by Imperial recruiters or missionaries. When those visitors stop coming, the feral populations will continue their lives much as before. Eventually, as the absence of outside contact might be noticed and interpreted according to local belief systems, but the practical impact will be minimal. In the very long term, some feral worlds might be rediscovered and recontacted by whatever successor civilizations emerge. Each of these examples illustrates how local circumstances will determine fate more than any universal pattern. The Imperium's collapse will not be uniform, but will create a patchwork of different outcomes, different survivor societies, different approaches to the challenges of the post-Emperor galaxy. This diversity might ultimately prove beneficial, ensuring that no single catastrophe can destroy all of humanity, that the species' eggs are distributed across many baskets, rather than concentrated in one fragile Imperium. And the question is whether these isolated successor societies will eventually reconnect and reform some larger civilization, or whether humanity's future is permanent fragmentation. The answer will depend partly on whether the Astronomican's function can be restored in some form, and partly on whether cultural and economic forces prove strong enough to drive reintegration, even without that psychic beacon to guide ships through the warp. For some chapters, particularly the first founding legions who trace their lineage directly back to the time of the Great Crusade, the Emperor's death will be a blow that strikes at the very core of their identity. The Ultramarines, who have always prided themselves on following the Emperor's vision of order and reason, will find themselves adrift without his guidance. The Imperial Fists, as who have stood guard over terror for 10,000 years, will feel as though they have failed in their most sacred duty. The Blood Angels, already struggling with the genetic curse inherited from their Primarch Sanguinius, will see the Emperor's death as a dark omen of their own chapter's eventual doom. Other chapters will react with fury, immediately seeking enemies to punish for this catastrophe. The Black Templars, who have never accepted the Codex Astartes restrictions on chapter size, and who have maintained a Great Crusade mindset across the millennia, will embark on a crusade of vengeance that makes their previous zealotry look restrained. They will seek out Chaos strongholds, Xenos empires, anything they can blame for the Emperor's death, and they will burn it all with righteous fury. The Space Wolves, he who have always maintained a more individualistic and skeptical approach to the Imperial cult, will perhaps adapt more easily, viewing the Emperor's death as the end of an era, but not the end of their purpose. They fight for humanity, not for one man, even if that man was the greatest humanity ever produced. The returned Primarchs, Robert Gilliman and Lionel Johnson will face unique challenges. Gilliman has already seen the Imperium his father built twisted into something neither of them would have wanted, a theocratic nightmare that treats the Emperor as a god despite his explicit rejection of such worship. The Emperor's death might, in some twisted way, give Gilliman more freedom to reshape the Imperium according to the original vision. But it also removes the one being who could have overruled him, like the one connection to the past who understood what they were trying to build. The Lion, having awakened more recently and still adjusting to the nightmare the Imperium has become, will find his father's death a bitter confirmation that the dream truly is over, that the Great Crusade failed not just militarily, but spiritually. If other Primarchs return, or were already active in secret, their reactions will vary based on their personalities and their own complicated relationships with the Emperor. Corvus Corax, the Raven Lord, might see the Emperor's death as liberation from a tyrant's shadow, even as he grieves for the loss of the being who created him. Jaghatai Khan, the Warhawk, would likely focus on practical matters, organizing resistance against the enemies that will certainly exploit this moment of weakness. Leman Russ, as if he were to return from his long quest, might rage against the universe itself for taking his father before he could make amends for his role in the burning of Prospero. Vulcan, the eternal warrior who has died and returned countless times across the millennia, might be the only one with genuine hope, believing that if he could return from death, perhaps the Emperor could as well. The effects on the Space Marines go beyond the emotional and spiritual. The Emperor's genetic legacy lives in every Space Marine through the gene seed, the biological implants derived from the Primarchs who were themselves created from the Emperor's own genetic material. Some chapters will fear that the Emperor's death might corrupt or degrade their gene seed, that the mystical connection between creator and creation might work both ways. Apothecaries will obsessively test their gene seed stocks, looking for signs of deterioration or mutation. Some chapters might even halt the creation of new Space Marines entirely, until they can be certain the process still works correctly. For traitor legions and renegade chapters that have fallen to chaos, the Emperor's death will be celebrated as the greatest victory in 10,000 years. The Black Legion, the Sons of Horus, renamed and rebuilt by Abaddon the Despoiler, will see this as validation of their long war, proof that the Imperium was always doomed, and that Horus was right to rebel. The Word-bearers, who turned to chaos worship during the Great Crusade itself, will preach that this proves the Emperor was never truly a god, that only the Chaos Gods are worthy of worship. The Thousand Sons, and still bitter over their persecution and the destruction of Prospero, will see bitter irony in the Emperor dying while trying to control the warp, the same power he condemned them for studying. But even among the traitor legions, reactions will not be uniform. Some Chaos Space Marines retain fragments of the loyalty they once felt, twisted and corrupted, but not entirely gone. They might feel a strange sense of loss, grief for what the Emperor represented even as they celebrate his death. Others will simply see opportunity, understanding that the Imperium will be vulnerable now in ways it hasn't been since the Horus heresy itself. This is the moment to strike, to claim territory, to corrupt worlds, to finally achieve the victory that has eluded them for 10 millennia. As the warp itself will react to the Emperor's death in ways that defy mortal understanding. The Emperor's presence in the warp has been a constant for 10,000 years, a blazing golden light that the Chaos Gods have battered against but never extinguished. His death will change the fundamental geography of the Imperium, the region of the warp near Terra, which has been contested territory between the Emperor's light and chaos corruption, will suddenly tip toward chaos. Warp storms will intensify. The barriers between real space and the warp will thin. Demon incursions will become more common and more difficult to banish. But the Emperor's soul will not simply dissipate. He is far too powerful for that, far too significant. When he dies, his psychic essence will enter the warp in its entirety, unbound from the physical anchor of his body for the first time since he was mortally wounded 10,000 years ago. What happens next is the subject of intense speculation and debate among those few in the Imperium who dare to think about such things. Some believe the Emperor will immediately begin to reconstitute himself, his soul gathering strength in the warp to be reborn in a new physical form. Others think he will battle the Chaos Gods directly, a war in the Imperium that will shake reality itself. Still others fear that his soul will be torn apart by the Chaos Gods, devoured and distributed among the four powers as the ultimate trophy. The most hopeful theory involves the concept of the Star Child. According to ancient and suppressed lore, when the Emperor fought Horus aboard the Vengeful Spirit, as he purged something from himself, a fragment of his soul that represented compassion and mercy. This fragment, unable to fully die, has existed in the warp ever since, growing slowly stronger as faith in the Emperor has grown across the Imperium. Some secret societies within the Imperium, groups like the Illuminati, believe that when the Emperor finally dies, his main soul will reunite with the Star Child fragment. The combined entity will be reborn, not as the man the Emperor once was, but as an actual god, a being of pure warp energy to rival the Chaos Gods themselves. This theory draws parallels with the Eldar gods. The Eldar created their gods through collective psychic belief and ritual. When the Eldar fell and their excess spawned Slaanesh, most of their gods were consumed by the newborn Chaos God, but the principle remained sound. But a species can, through sufficient psychic investment and belief, create gods in the warp. Humanity has been worshipping the Emperor as a god for 10,000 years. Trillions upon trillions of humans across 1,000,000 worlds have prayed to him, sacrificed in his name, built temples to his glory. All of that faith, all of that psychic energy, has been accumulating in the warp. If the Emperor's soul could harness that accumulated power, he might indeed become a god in truth. But this transformation would not be without cost. The Emperor, if he became a god, would not be the same being who once walked among humanity, who understood mortal concerns and governed with logic and reason. He would be shaped by the faith of his worshippers, by their perceptions and beliefs and desires. The imperial cult has painted the Emperor as a harsh, unyielding deity who demands absolute obedience and punishes deviation from orthodoxy with death. If the Emperor becomes a god, he might become exactly what his worshippers believe him to be, a cosmic tyrant more terrible than any chaos god, because he will represent not the changing whims of emotion and excess, but eternal, unchanging law. The other possibility is that the Emperor's soul fractures entirely, unable to maintain coherence in the face of the Chaos God's assault. In this scenario, the being who was once the Emperor might cease to exist as a unified consciousness, instead becoming multiple entities, each representing a different aspect of his nature. There might be an Emperor of War, a psychic entity embodying his role as the greatest military leader humanity ever produced. There might be an Emperor of Knowledge, representing his scientific brilliance and his drive to advance human understanding. There might be an Emperor of Tyranny, representing the darker aspects of his rule, the genocide of non-compliant populations, and the brutal efficiency with which he crushed opposition. These fragments might war with each other in the warp, or they might simply drift apart, becoming independent entities with no memory of what they once were. The Chaos Gods themselves will have complex reactions to the Emperor's death. On one level, they will celebrate. The Emperor has been their greatest obstacle for 10,000 years, the one force in the galaxy that could meaningfully oppose them. His death removes that obstacle and opens humanity to corruption on a scale previously impossible. But on another level, the Chaos Gods might feel something approaching loss. The Emperor was a worthy opponent, a being whose opposition gave their conflict meaning. The great game, the eternal struggle for dominance among the chaos powers and against the material universe, becomes less interesting without such a formidable player on the other side. Horn, the blood god, might respect the Emperor's death if it came in battle, seeing it as a warrior's end worthy of honor, even as he celebrates the removal of an enemy. Tzeentch, the architect of fate, might have already foreseen this moment and woven it into plans within plans, schemes that will only become apparent in centuries to come. Nurgle, the Plague Father, might see the Emperor's final decay as a natural and inevitable part of the universe's cycle, a confirmation of his own philosophy that all things must eventually rot. Slaanesh, the Dark Prince, might feel cheated, having been denied the opportunity to fully corrupt such a powerful and significant soul. The demon legions that have been held at bay for 10,000 years will certainly celebrate. Every demon in the warp knows of the Emperor, the golden anathema whose very existence pains them, whose psychic presence acts as a repellent to their kind. With his death, entire regions of space that were previously difficult for demons to manifest in will become vulnerable. Worlds that maintained some protection through proximity to terror or through the Emperor's diffuse psychic influence will find that protection gone. Demonic incursions will increase in frequency and intensity across the entire galaxy. On Terra itself, assuming the planet survives the immediate aftermath of the Webway breach, the social and political consequences will reshape human civilization. The High Lords of Terra will attempt to maintain authority, but their claims will be contested by numerous factions. The Adeptus Ministorum will demand a greater role in governance, arguing that in the Emperor's absence, his spiritual representatives should lead humanity. The Adeptus Mechanicus might see this as an opportunity to reassert the independence they surrendered at the founding of the Imperium, withdrawing to Mars and making demands in exchange for continued support. The Inquisition, which operates outside normal imperial authority structures, will face its own internal struggles as different ordos pursue different agendas in the power vacuum. The Officio Assassinorum, the Imperium's secret killers, but will find themselves in high demand as political factions seek to eliminate rivals. Assassins who normally work to protect the Imperium from external threats might find themselves caught in civil conflicts, forced to choose sides, or simply survive in an environment where every institution is fighting for dominance. The Vindicar Temple might see its members contracted by multiple High Lords simultaneously, each trying to eliminate the others. The Calexus Temple, whose assassins are created from psychic nulls, might be deployed to eliminate psykers who claim to speak with the Emperor's voice from beyond death, whether those claims are genuine or fraudulent. The Imperial Guard, renamed the Astra Militarum in recent centuries, but still the backbone of the Imperium's military might, will face a crisis of command authority, where regiments are raised from individual worlds and instilled with fanatical loyalty to the Emperor. When that Emperor dies, what becomes of that loyalty? Some regiments will transfer their allegiance to whatever authority figure is most immediate, whether that's a local governor, a Space Marine chapter master, or simply their own commanding officers. Others will fragment entirely, with soldiers deserting to return home, to join mercenary companies, or simply to find meaning in a galaxy that suddenly seems purposeless. Some imperial worlds will attempt to maintain independence, declaring themselves sovereign nations no longer bound to Terra's authority. Governors who have chafed under imperial control for generations will see this as their opportunity to break free. Some of these breakaway states will be benevolent, attempting to govern their populations with genuine care for their well-being. Others will become petty tyrannies, with governors declaring themselves kings or emperors in their own right. Still others will be infiltrated by chaos cults or genestealer infestations, and will serve as beachheads for humanity's enemies. The Adeptus Arbites, the Imperium's law enforcement, will struggle to maintain order in the face of widespread breakdown of social norms. The laws they enforce derive their authority from the Emperor's decree. With the Emperor dead, what is the basis for law? Philosophical debates about legal authority seem abstract until you're an Arbites standing in a riot, trying to decide whether you still have the right to use lethal force to enforce compliance. Some Arbites will continue their duties out of simple inertia, because it's what they've always done and they cannot imagine doing otherwise. Others will become brutally pragmatic, enforcing order through fear regardless of legal niceties. Still others will abandon their posts, seeing no point in risking their lives for laws that no longer seem to have meaning. For the average imperial citizen, the emperor's death will have impacts that vary tremendously based on their location and circumstances. Citizens on Terra itself will face the immediate horror of a demon invasion and the collapse of social order. Those on worlds near Terra will experience disruption of trade and communication, but might not face immediate existential threats. Citizens on frontier worlds far from Terra might not even learn of the Emperor's death for years due to the difficulty of communication without the Astronomicon. And when they do learn, the news might seem abstract and distant, less important than the immediate threats they face from Xenos or local problems. In many ways, the Imperium has been preparing for the Emperor's death for 10,000 years without admitting it. The entire structure of imperial governance has been designed to function without active direction from the Emperor. He has been incapacitated for longer than any institution has existed, longer than any tradition has been practiced. The Imperium's bureaucracy has grown to encompass everything, making decisions through committee and precedent rather than through direct leadership. In theory, the machinery of the Imperium could continue functioning indefinitely, even without the Emperor, just as a body might continue certain automatic functions, even after brain death. But theory and practice diverge sharply when facing the psychic and spiritual consequences of the Emperor's death. The Imperium has never been just a political entity. It has been held together as much by faith as by force, as much by shared belief in the Emperor's divinity as by any administrative structure. When that faith is shaken, when citizens from the lowest hive ganger to the highest Lord Commander must confront the mortality of the being they've been taught is an immortal god, the psychological and spiritual consequences cannot be underestimated. Some imperial scholars, those few who dare to think about such forbidden topics, have attempted to model what the Imperium might look like a century after the Emperor's death. These projections vary wildly, but certain patterns emerge across most scenarios. Yet the Imperium as a unified entity ceases to exist within the first few years. What replaces it depends on how the power struggles resolve, and how effectively the Imperium's institutions adapt to the new reality. In optimistic scenarios, several large successor states emerge, each controlling hundreds or thousands of worlds, maintaining some level of trade and military cooperation against external threats. These states might be organized around returned primarchs, around particularly powerful space marine chapters, or around coalitions of sector governors who band together for mutual protection. In more pessimistic scenarios, the fragmentation continues until every world or small cluster of worlds stands alone. The galaxy returns to something resembling the age of strife that preceded the Emperor's unification of Terra, as with each human world isolated and vulnerable to Xenos predation and chaos corruption. In these scenarios, humanity as a galactic power effectively ends, reduced to scattered pockets of civilization desperately trying to survive against overwhelming odds. The absolute worst-case scenario involves not just the political collapse of the Imperium, but the extinction of humanity itself. In this nightmare vision, the Emperor's death triggers a cascade of catastrophes that humanity cannot survive. The webway breach on Terra creates a new Eye of Terror, a permanent warp rift that makes the entire solar system uninhabitable. The loss of the Astronomicon means Imperial fleets cannot coordinate against the Tyrannid hive fleets, which devour world after world without organized resistance. Chaos cultists corrupt entire sectors simultaneously, turning human populations into demon-worshipping hordes that attack their neighbors. Necron dynasties awaken across the galaxy, pursuing their ancient plan to use human souls as pawns against chaos, harvesting populations for their schemes. The Orcs, sensing weakness, unite under powerful warlords and launch invasions that sweep across Imperial space. Within a century, humanity is reduced to isolated pockets of survivors, and within a millennium, those last remnants are extinguished. The species that once ruled the galaxy goes extinct, a cautionary tale for whatever civilization rises to dominance next. But extinction is not inevitable, and human resilience should not be underestimated. Humanity has survived catastrophes before. The Age of Strife lasted 5,000 years. It's a period of horror that makes the current era look benevolent by comparison, yet humanity endured. Individual human populations on isolated worlds developed technologies and strategies to survive without outside support. When the Emperor finally unified Terra and began the Great Crusade, he found human worlds scattered across the galaxy, each having survived in its own way. That same resilience might manifest again in the Emperor's absence. The Space Marines, in particular, represent a stabilizing force that might prevent total collapse. There are roughly 1,000 Space Marine chapters, each controlling its own territory and maintaining its own recruiting worlds. These chapters are largely self-sufficient, capable of maintaining their equipment and replenishing their ranks without support from Terra. Many chapters are fleet-based, but not dependent on any single world. If the Imperium fragments, these chapters could serve as the nuclei of new human civilizations, providing military protection and institutional continuity, even as political structures collapse around them. Some chapters might embrace this role enthusiastically, establishing themselves as overt rulers of the territories they protect. The Ultramarines already govern a mini-empire in Ultramar, a cluster of 500 worlds that serve as a model of efficient imperial administration. With the Imperium fragmented, Ultramar might expand, with Reboot Guilliman establishing himself as the leader of a successor state that attempts to preserve the Emperor's original vision. Or other chapters might resist governing directly, but still provide essential military services to human worlds in exchange for resources and recruits. The balance of power between Space Marines and normal humans would shift dramatically in such a scenario. During the Imperium's height, Space Marines served the Imperium, acting as an elite military force deployed at the direction of the High Lords of Terra. With that central authority gone, Space Marines answer only to their own chapter masters and, potentially, to returned Primarchs. This could lead to a renaissance of sorts, a return to the Great Crusade era, when Space Marine legions were essentially independent forces cooperating toward a common goal. It could also lead to abuse, with some chapters becoming tyrants over the populations they're supposed to protect. The Adeptus Mechanicus faces its own crossroads at the Emperor's death. The cult Mechanicus has always maintained a degree of independence from the broader Imperium, worshipping the machine god rather than the Emperor, though they pay lip service to the idea that the two are aspects of the same being. The Emperor's death gives them an excuse to assert full independence, to withdraw to their forge worlds and make alliances based solely on their own interests, rather than Imperial loyalty. Mars might declare itself neutral in any conflicts between Imperial successor states, offering its services to all sides in exchange for resources and technology. Other forge worlds might choose sides, backing particular factions in exchange for territorial concessions or special privileges. The loss of the Mechanicus's full cooperation would be catastrophic for any Imperial successor states. The Mechanicus controls all advanced manufacturing, all the knowledge necessary to maintain the Imperium's technology. Without their support, Space Marine chapters cannot maintain their power armor. Imperial Guard regiments cannot replace their lasguns and tanks. Void ships cannot be repaired or constructed. Any faction that wants to remain militarily viable must maintain good relations with at least some forge worlds, which gives the Mechanicus tremendous leverage in negotiations. The Inquisition presents a unique case in the post-Emperor Imperium. The Inquisition has always operated outside normal chains of command, answering to no one but other Inquisitors and, in theory, the Emperor himself. As individual Inquisitors have tremendous autonomy, able to requisition resources and command obedience from Imperial institutions through the authority of their office. But that authority derives from the Emperor's mandate. With the Emperor dead, some will question whether the Inquisition retains its legitimacy, or whether Inquisitors are simply well-armed individuals with delusions of authority. Different Inquisitors will respond to this legitimacy crisis in different ways. Radicals might see the emperor's death as proof that their heterodox methods were necessary, that the Puritan adherence to doctrine and tradition was what doomed the Imperium. Puritans might double down on their orthodoxy, hunting heretics with even greater zeal in an attempt to preserve what remains of imperial civilization. Some inquisitors might go rogue entirely, using their resources and skills for personal gain, now that there's no higher authority to answer to. Others might genuinely try to preserve the Inquisition's mission of protecting humanity, working to prevent the worst excesses of the power struggles that follow the emperor's death. The different ordos within the Inquisition might find themselves working at cross purposes more often than before. The Ordo Hereticus, dedicated to hunting witches and heretics, will have their hands full with the explosion of chaos cults and religious schisms following the emperor's death. The Ordo Xenos, focused on alien threats, will be overwhelmed by the opportunities the Imperium's weakness presents to Xenos empires. The Ordo Malleus, specializing in demon hunting, will face an endless war as demonic incursions increase across the galaxy. Coordination between these ordos has always been difficult, and the Emperor's death will make it nearly impossible as each pursues its own priorities without central guidance. For the Xenos empires that have existed in the Imperium's shadow for 10,000 years, the Emperor's death represents both opportunity and danger. The Tau Empire, still young and expanding, might see this as their chance to spread the greater good across human worlds that are suddenly without protection. The Tau have always preferred diplomacy and incorporation to outright conquest when possible. They might approach isolated human worlds with offers of protection and integration into the Tau Empire, painting themselves as a viable alternative to the collapsing Imperium. Some desperate human governors might accept these offers, preferring Tau rule to chaos corruption or tyrannid consumption. The Eldar, both Craftworld and Drukhari, will react to the Emperor's death with mixed feelings. The Craftworld Eldar have long viewed the Emperor as a necessary evil, a human leader who could keep humanity organized enough to be a useful tool against chaos and other threats, but also a potential danger if his plans came to fruition. His death removes both the potential benefit and the potential threat. The Eldar will likely pursue their own inscrutable schemes, occasionally intervening in human affairs when it serves their purposes, but otherwise focusing on their own survival. The Drukhari, the Dark Eldar who raid real space from the webway city of Komorra, will see the Emperor's death as an invitation to intensify their raids, taking advantage of humanity's disarray to capture more slaves and fuel their twisted civilization. The Necrons, ancient machines that once ruled the galaxy in the time before the Eldar's dominance, have their own plans for the galaxy that have little to do with humanity specifically. Some Necron dynasties might view the Emperor's death as irrelevant to their goals, while others might see opportunity in claiming former Imperial worlds for their own purposes. The Necrons' ultimate goal of reversing biotransference and regaining organic bodies might actually require human souls and psychic energy, making humanity's survival important to them, though not out of any sense of benevolence. The Tyrannids, the extragalactic hive mind that consumes all biomass in its path, will be drawn to the psychic turbulence of the Emperor's death like sharks to blood in water. The hive mind seems to target areas of intense psychic activity, and the Emperor's death will create psychic ripples that echo across the galaxy. Multiple hive fleets might converge on the Imperium's core territories, drawn by the psychic beacon of his passing. Without coordinated Imperial resistance, these hive fleets might consume dozens of worlds before any organized response can be mounted. The greatest Orc empire might emerge in the power vacuum following the Emperor's death. Orcs thrive on conflict, and the galaxy-spanning wars that follow the Imperium's collapse would provide ideal conditions for Orc populations to explode. A particularly successful Orc warlord might unite multiple clans and tribes, and creating an empire that rivals the legendary beast that nearly conquered the Imperium in the early centuries after the heresy. Such an empire might actually pose an existential threat to humanity in ways that individual Orc invasions never could. coordinated enough to be strategic, but still driven by the Orcs' love of violence. Yet for all the doom and catastrophe that would follow the Emperor's death, there exists the possibility, however slim, that it might ultimately prove beneficial for humanity. The Imperium has stagnated for 10,000 years, locked into patterns of thought and behavior that prevent adaptation and innovation. The imperial cult has suppressed knowledge, burned libraries, and executed free thinkers in the name of orthodoxy. The rigid hierarchies and bureaucracy have made the Imperium incredibly inefficient, with worlds dying because aid cannot arrive in time through the labyrinthine approval process. The fear of change has turned the Imperium into a civilization that looks backward to a mythical golden age rather than forward to improvement. The Emperor's death, catastrophic as it would be in the short term, might force humanity to evolve beyond these limitations. Isolated human worlds would need to innovate to survive, rediscovering lost technologies or developing new ones out of desperation. The breakdown of central authority might allow different models of government to emerge, some of which might be more just and efficient than the Imperium ever was. The weakening of the imperial cult's authority might permit scientific inquiry and rational thought to flourish again. Or humanity might fragment into 100 different cultures and societies, losing the unified identity the Imperium provided, but gaining diversity and adaptability in exchange. This perspective requires taking a very long view, imagining a future thousands of years after the Emperor's death. In that distant future, humanity might have evolved into something new, multiple civilizations connected by trade and shared history, but not by political unity, each pursuing its own path to survival and advancement. The Emperor's dream of a united humanity spanning the galaxy would be dead, but humanity itself would endure, perhaps in forms he never imagined and might not have approved of. But such optimistic long-term projections offer little comfort to those who would live through the immediate aftermath of the Emperor's death. For them, the experience would be one of unrelenting horror, of watching everything they knew collapse around them, of facing threats on every side without the institutions and certainties that have structured their entire lives. The first generation after the Emperor's death would know only loss, confusion, and desperate struggle for survival. Whatever phoenix might eventually rise from the ashes of the Imperium would be small comfort to those who burned in the fire. The question of the Emperor's death has haunted the Imperium for 10,000 years, a shadow that grows longer with each passing decade as the Golden Throne continues its slow failure. Those who know the truth, the custodians standing vigil in the throne room, the tech priests desperately maintaining failing systems, the highest-ranking members of the Inquisition and the High Lords, all of them live with the knowledge that catastrophe is not a matter of if, but when. They have made what preparations they can, but they know in their hearts that no preparation can truly suffice for the magnitude of the disaster they're facing. Some have advocated for attempting to replace the Emperor, to find or create another being capable of powering the Astronomicon and holding the webway breach closed. The Inquisition's most radical elements have pursued projects along these lines, attempting to create artificial gods through mass sacrifice or psychic manipulation. All such projects have failed, often catastrophically, proving that the Emperor's unique nature cannot be easily replicated. He is the product of 10,000 years of history, of deliberate planning by ancient shamans, all of genetic engineering and psychic development beyond modern understanding. There is no replacement waiting in the wings, no backup plan that can preserve the status quo if he finally fails. Others have suggested attempting to heal the Emperor, to restore him to his full power through some miraculous intervention. The Sisters of Battle pray constantly for such a miracle. Various tech priest factions pursue technological solutions, searching ancient archives for lost knowledge that might repair the Golden Throne or restore the Emperor's body. The Adeptus Custodes maintain a desperate hope that if only they guard him faithfully enough, he might recover on his own. But 10,000 years have passed without any sign of improvement. If healing were possible, it would have happened by now. While the emperor's condition is stable only in the sense that his decline is gradual rather than sudden. Every year he becomes slightly weaker, his psychic presence slightly dimmer, his control over the Golden Throne systems slightly less precise. The trajectory is clear to anyone willing to see it. A third faction, small and mostly silent, believes that the emperor's death is actually what he wants, that his continued existence on the Golden Throne is a torment he endures only out of duty to humanity. They point to the emperor's sacrifice of Horus, to his willingness to endure any amount of suffering for the greater good, and argue that he would welcome the release death would bring if it didn't mean abandoning humanity to catastrophe. These individuals pray not for the emperor's continued survival, but for an end to his suffering, hoping that somehow a way can be found to allow his death without triggering all the terrible consequences that would follow. The emperor himself, trapped in his ruined body, unable to speak clearly through 10,000 years of psychic degradation, cannot tell anyone what he wants or what he knows of what comes after. Psychers who have communed with his presence report fragmentary visions and emotions rather than clear communication. Some sense terrible pain and desperate endurance. Others feel a vast, cold calculation, a mind that has transcended mortal concerns and views reality from a perspective incomprehensible to ordinary humans. Still others report something that might be hope, a sense that the emperor knows something they don't, that he has plans that extend beyond his death. If the emperor does have plans for his own death, then he has not shared them with anyone who could act on them. Perhaps he cannot communicate with sufficient clarity to explain complex strategies. Perhaps he believes that such knowledge would itself be dangerous, that the power struggles it would provoke would do more harm than good. Or perhaps he simply endures from moment to moment, maintaining his vigil not because he has some master plan, but because it's the only thing he can do, because giving up would mean the immediate death of billions, and he cannot bring himself to be responsible for that, even to end his own suffering. The tragedy of the emperor is that he has become trapped by his own success. He created an imperium so dependent on his existence that it cannot survive without him. He encouraged the imperial cult because faith provided social cohesion and protection against chaos. Even though he personally rejected the idea of his own divinity, he built systems and institutions that centralized power and authority to an extreme degree, because only such centralization could hold the Imperium together in the face of the threats it faced. But in doing so, he created a civilization that cannot evolve, cannot adapt, cannot release its grip on the past long enough to build a sustainable future. If the emperor were to die and somehow communicate with those he left behind, what would he tell them? Would he apologize for creating a system so fragile that his death would shatter it? Would he express pride in how long the Imperium endured despite all the forces arrayed against it? Would he offer guidance for what should come after? A vision for how humanity might survive and thrive without him? Or would he simply acknowledge that he did the best he could with the resources and knowledge available, that the Imperium was always a temporary solution to an impossible problem, and that its eventual collapse was inevitable from the moment Magnus shattered the Webway project? We cannot know what the Emperor would say because he cannot speak clearly enough to be understood. All we can do is observe the Imperium he created, analyze its strengths and weaknesses, and try to imagine what might come after. The question is not really whether the Emperor will die. Everything dies eventually, even beings as powerful as him. The question is when that death will come, whether it will be in 10 years or 1,000, and whether humanity will have developed the resilience and adaptability to survive it when it does. And some argue that the Imperium has already survived the Emperor's death in all but name. He has been effectively absent for 10,000 years, unable to provide active leadership or guidance. The Imperium that exists now is not the one he built during the Great Crusade. It has evolved and changed, for better and worse, into something he might not even recognize. The brutal theocracy, the stagnant technology, the grinding bureaucracy, the endless wars of attrition, none of this was part of his vision. If the Imperium can survive 10,000 years without active leadership from the Emperor, perhaps it can survive his complete absence as well. But this argument ignores the crucial functions the Emperor still performs, even in his current state. The Astronomicon is not symbolic. Interstellar navigation genuinely depends on it. And the webway breach is not theoretical. It really is held closed only by the Emperor's will, and its opening really would be catastrophic. The psychic pressure he exerts on the warp, the way his presence constrains demon activity and provides some protection to Imperial psychers, these are tangible effects that would vanish with his death. The Imperium might have learned to function without his active leadership, but it has not learned to function without these critical services, and it's unclear whether it could. The future of humanity after the Emperor's death will depend on countless variables, most of them unpredictable. How quickly does the fragmentation occur? Which institutions retain credibility and authority? Do any Primarchs return to provide leadership? How aggressively do Xenos empires exploit the opportunity? And how many worlds fall to chaos in the initial chaos versus how many successfully resist? Does any faction discover a way to partially restore the Astronomicon's function, even if they can't fully replace it? Can the webway breach be contained through means other than the Emperor's psychic might? The answers to these questions will determine whether humanity's future is one of extinction, of permanent fragmentation into isolated pockets of civilization, of consolidation into a handful of large successor states, or of eventual reunification under new leadership and new principles. Each of these outcomes seems plausible, given what we know about the Imperium and the galaxy it inhabits. The grim darkness of the far future admits of no easy answers, no guaranteed outcomes, only the certainty that humanity will face its greatest test, and that untold billions will suffer and die regardless of the final result. For 10,000 years, the Imperium has existed in a state of managed decline, holding on to what it has rather than building something new, maintaining the systems established during the Great Crusade rather than developing better ones. The Emperor's death would force an end to that stasis, would require humanity to either adapt and evolve or face extinction. In that sense, his death might be the most significant event in human history since his birth tens of thousands of years ago, a moment when everything changes and new possibilities, terrible and hopeful in equal measure, emerge from the ashes of the old order. The watching custodians know this. The desperate tech priests know this. The calculating inquisitors and scheming high lords know this. Even the common citizens in their trillions, who know nothing of the Golden Throne or the Emperor's true state, sense on some level that the foundations of their civilization are crumbling, that the end of an era approaches whether they wish it or not. The galaxy holds its breath, waiting for the moment when the golden light finally goes dark, when the 10,000-year vigil ends, when humanity must finally face a future without the Emperor's presence, however diminished it has become. And in that moment, in that terrible instant, when 10,000 years of accumulated certainty shatters like glass, humanity will discover what it truly is, beneath all the propaganda and mythology and institutional inertia, as it will discover whether the species that conquered the stars has the resilience to survive their loss, whether the beings who once wielded science and reason to build a utopia can rediscover those virtues after 10,000 years of superstition and decline, whether humanity deserves to endure, or whether its extinction will be just another brief tragedy in a galaxy that has witnessed countless civilizations rise and fall across billions of years. The Emperor's death, when it comes, will not be an ending, but a beginning. It will be the start of humanity's greatest trial, the test that determines whether the species survives another 10,000 years or goes extinct within a generation. Every choice made in the aftermath, every alliance formed and broken, every battle won and lost, every world saved or abandoned, all of it will matter in ways that are difficult to overstate. The future is unwritten, and the quill that will write it is held by countless hands, human and alien, loyal and traitorous, driven by noble purpose and base greed in equal measure. This is the great question that haunts the Imperium of man as it stumbles into its final years. Not whether the Emperor will die, but what comes after. Not whether humanity can survive his death, but what form that survival will take, and at what cost. The answer will be written in blood and fire across 1,000,000 worlds, in battles fought in the depths of space and in the hearts of individuals making impossible choices under unbearable pressure. It will be written by heroes we cannot yet name and villains who have not yet revealed themselves, by civilizations that have not yet been born, and by the ghosts of those already dead. The Emperor built an Imperium that spans the galaxy, an achievement unmatched in human history. But empires, even galactic ones, are mortal. They rise and fall, and the Imperium's fall, when it comes, will be as spectacular and terrible as its rise was magnificent. Yet humanity itself might endure beyond the Imperium, might find new forms of organization, and new purposes that serve it better than the rigid theocracy that has dominated for so long. That is the hope that sustains those who dare to think about the unthinkable, who plan for a future after the Emperor, knowing they likely won't live to see it. In the end, whilst the Emperor's greatest gift to humanity might not be the Imperium he built or the forces he defeated, but the example he set of endurance in the face of impossible odds, of continuing to struggle even when victory seems impossible, of holding on when letting go would be easier. He has sat on the golden throne for 10,000 years, has endured agony beyond comprehension, has maintained his vigil despite every rational reason to give up, all for the sake of a species that has largely forgotten what he truly was and what he actually stood for. When he finally dies, when that inconceivable endurance finally ends, perhaps humanity will remember that example and find within itself the strength to endure as well. Perhaps the scattered remnants of the Imperium, isolated and desperate and facing extinction from a dozen directions, will choose to continue fighting not because they expect to win, but because the alternative is unacceptable. Perhaps in the darkest hour, when all hope seems lost and the night threatens to consume everything, humanity will discover that it inherited not just the Emperor's genetic legacy or his institutions, but his indomitable will, his refusal to surrender, his determination to survive no matter the cost. Or perhaps not. Perhaps humanity will fail the test, will fragment and collapse, and ultimately go extinct, just another species that reached for the stars only to fall back into darkness. The universe is vast and uncaring, and humanity's extinction would barely register in the cosmic scale of things. Other species have risen and fallen. The Eldar dominated the galaxy for millions of years and nearly went extinct in a single night of their own making. The Necrons ruled before them and chose to sleep for 60 million years rather than face a universe they could no longer control. Humanity's story might end with the Emperor's death, a species that rose to galactic prominence only to collapse when the single point of failure at its center finally failed. We cannot know which future awaits. The Emperor's death is Schrödinger's apocalypse, simultaneously the end of everything and the beginning of something new, until it actually happens, until that moment arrives and the consequences begin to unfold in real time. All we can do is speculate and prepare as best we can. The custodians will continue their vigil. The tech priests will continue their desperate maintenance. The inquisitors will continue their schemes. The faithful will continue their prayers. And the Emperor will continue to endure, day by day, sacrifice by sacrifice, holding back the darkness for just one more dawn. But the dawn will eventually come when the light does not return, when the golden glow of the Astronomicon fades from the warp, when the psychic scream of the Emperor's death echoes across the galaxy. And in that moment, humanity will discover its true nature, will be tested in ways it has not been tested since the age of strife, will either rise to meet the challenge or fall beneath it. There is no middle ground, no comfortable compromise between survival and extinction. Only the struggle itself, played out across the stars, written in the lives and deaths of trillions, or witnessed by a galaxy that has seen it all before and will see it all again. If you've made it this far, through this exploration of one of Warhammer 40k's most significant what-if scenarios, I hope you've gained a deeper appreciation for just how precarious humanity's position is in the grim darkness of the far future. The Emperor's death is not just a plot point or a hypothetical scenario for fan theories. It's a looming inevitability that shapes everything about the Imperium, that explains why the setting is so dark and desperate, why the Imperium clings so fiercely to traditions that no longer serve it well, why innovation and hope are treated as dangerous heresies. Understanding what would happen if the Emperor dies helps us understand why the Imperium is the way it is now, why it makes choices that seem irrational or counterproductive from an outside perspective. Every brutal suppression of knowledge, every wasteful bureaucratic procedure, every seemingly needless cruelty can be traced back to a civilization that knows on some level that it's dying, that it's living on borrowed time, that the center cannot hold much longer. The Imperium is a civilization in its final days, whether those days last 10 years or 1,000, and that knowledge colors everything it does. The psychological impact of the Emperor's death extends far beyond the immediate political and military consequences. For billions of imperial citizens, the Emperor is not merely a distant ruler, but the central organizing principle of their entire understanding of reality. Children are taught from birth that the Emperor watches over them, that their suffering has meaning in his grand design, that obedience to his will is the highest virtue. The imperial cult provides structure and meaning to lives that would otherwise be unbearably grim, offering the promise of reward in the afterlife for those who serve faithfully in this one. When that central pillar of meaning suddenly collapses, when children ask their parents where the Emperor has gone and receive no satisfactory answer, when preachers struggle to explain how a god could die, the psychological damage ripples through entire societies. Mental health crises sweep across worlds as populations struggle to find new meaning in a universe that suddenly seems purposeless. Suicide rates spike as individuals who built their entire identity around service to the Emperor find themselves adrift. Depression becomes endemic as the hope the Emperor represented evaporates, leaving behind only the grinding reality of life in the Imperium, with none of the spiritual compensation that made it bearable. The generational trauma of the Emperor's death will persist for centuries. Those who lived through it will carry the scars forever, unable to fully trust in anything or anyone after the ultimate betrayal of their god's mortality. They will pass this trauma to their children, teaching them never to believe too deeply, never to invest too much faith in any single idea or institution. The cynicism and nihilism this breeds will create societies fundamentally different from the fanatically faithful populations of the pre-death Imperium. Societies that might be more psychologically resilient in some ways, but also more prone to despair and less capable of the collective action that faith once made possible. Different regions of the Imperium will develop different cultural responses to the Emperor's death. Some will embrace apocalyptic death cults, believing that the Emperor's death signals the end times, and that the only proper response is to hasten humanity's extinction through mass suicide or violence. These cults will need to be suppressed by force, draining military resources that could be used against external threats. Other regions will turn to alternative belief systems, creating new religions or reviving ancient ones suppressed during the Imperium's reign. Some might worship the Primarchs as new gods, creating pantheons from the Emperor's sons. Others might turn to ancestor worship or nature reverence or philosophical systems that reject the supernatural entirely. The diversity of responses will itself be destabilizing. The Imperium has always been characterized by remarkable cultural diversity in material matters, combined with enforced uniformity in spiritual ones. Every imperial world has its own customs, languages, and traditions, but all are united by worship of the Emperor and adherence to the basic tenets of the imperial cult. Remove that common spiritual foundation, and the only thing holding diverse worlds together is military force and economic necessity. Some regions might maintain cohesion through these factors alone, but others will drift apart, developing into truly alien cultures despite sharing human biology. Education systems across the Imperium will face immediate crisis. Imperial education has always been designed primarily to produce obedient workers and soldiers who unquestioningly accept the social order. The Emperor's divine authority was the ultimate justification for this order, the reason why questioning or innovation was heresy rather than virtue. Without that authority, the whole pedagogical framework collapses. Teachers who have spent entire careers indoctrinating students suddenly find themselves unable to answer basic questions. Why should students obey? Why should they accept the social hierarchy? Why should they sacrifice their own interests for the collective good? The old answers all reference the Emperor's will, but those answers no longer suffice. Some educational institutions will attempt to adapt, but developing new justifications for social order based on practical necessity rather than divine mandate. They will teach students that cooperation is necessary for survival, that social hierarchies emerge naturally from differences in ability and effort, that some level of self-sacrifice is required for any functional society. These rational approaches might work in relatively stable regions with educated populations, but they require a level of nuance and critical thinking that most imperial citizens have been deliberately denied. The result will be confusion and conflict, as different schools of thought compete for dominance. The economic consequences of the Emperor's death deserve deeper examination. The Imperium's economy is vast and complex, spanning 1 million worlds and producing everything from basic agricultural goods to the most sophisticated military equipment in the galaxy. This economy depends on interstellar trade to function. Individual worlds specialize, producing surplus of particular goods in exchange for things they cannot produce themselves. Forge worlds manufacture weapons and equipment. Agri-worlds grow food. Hive worlds provide labor and finished goods. Mining worlds extract raw materials. All of this specialization creates efficiency, but also creates dependence. When the Astronomicon fails and interstellar navigation becomes unreliable, this intricate web of trade begins to unravel. Ships that would normally complete trade runs in weeks or months now take years or never arrive at all. Worlds that import most of their food face starvation within seasons. For forge worlds that depend on imported raw materials see production halt. Hive worlds that export manufactured goods to pay for food imports watch their populations starve as trade collapses. The economic catastrophe will kill more people than any military conflict in the immediate aftermath of the Emperor's death. Some worlds will adapt by becoming more self-sufficient, diverting resources from specialized production to meeting their own basic needs. This adaptation will reduce their overall prosperity and productivity, creating a ratcheting down effect where each world becomes poorer as it loses access to trade. Other worlds will attempt to maintain their specialized economies by establishing new trade networks with nearby systems, creating regional trading blocks that operate independently of any central authority. These blocks might eventually form the basis of new political entities, economic alliances that grow into defensive pacts, and ultimately into new governments. The loss of centralized currency and taxation systems will force regions to develop new economic institutions. The Imperium's currency, the Throne-Geld, derives its value from the faith that the central government will honor it. With that government's legitimacy in question, the currency becomes suspect. Some regions will continue using Throne-Gelds out of inertia, others will create new currencies backed by local authorities, and still others might return to barter systems or commodity money like precious metals. The chaos of competing currencies will make interregional trade even more difficult, further fracturing the Imperium's economy. The medical consequences of the Emperor's death extend beyond the immediate casualties from violence and starvation. The Imperium's medical system, such as it is, depends on centralized resources and knowledge. The Adeptus Mechanicus controls most advanced medical technology, and their forge worlds produce the equipment and medicines that keep billions alive. Diseases that have been controlled for centuries might return as vaccine production halts and distribution networks collapse. New plagues might emerge in the chaos, spreading unchecked as quarantine systems break down and populations migrate in desperate searches for food and safety. The loss of specialized medical knowledge will be particularly devastating. The Imperium has always hoarded knowledge, keeping it concentrated in the hands of a small elite rather than distributing it widely. When institutions collapse, that knowledge can be lost entirely if the individuals who held it die without passing it on. Medical techniques, pharmaceutical formulae, surgical procedures, all of this might be forgotten in the chaos, setting healthcare back centuries on affected worlds. Future generations might look at the ruined medical facilities of the Imperium and wonder how their ancestors achieved such miracles, unable to replicate them with the fragmented knowledge that survived. The environmental damage caused by the Emperor's death will reshape entire worlds. Industrial facilities designed to operate under careful regulation will continue running without oversight, dumping toxins and pollutants unchecked. Nuclear reactors will melt down when maintenance fails. Chemical plants will explode when safety systems degrade. Geoengineering projects that maintain habitable conditions on hostile worlds will fail, returning those worlds to their natural states and killing anyone who cannot evacuate in time. The Imperium has terraformed thousands of worlds over the millennia, bending hostile environments to human needs through technology and sustained effort. Many of these worlds will revert when that effort stops, becoming uninhabitable death traps littered with the ruins of failed colonies. Some worlds will face the opposite problem. Heavily fortified fortress worlds maintained in states of high readiness against external threats will find themselves locked in those states, unable to demobilize or transition to peacetime economies. Military governments will perpetuate themselves through fear, claiming that threats remain even after they've been defeated or have moved on, using security concerns to justify authoritarian control. These worlds might remain martially efficient, but will be grim places to live, eternally mobilized against enemies real and imagined. The fate of navigator houses deserves special attention. These ancient bloodlines, mutants with a third eye that allows them to perceive the warp, have monopolized faster-than-light navigation for 10,000 years. The navigator houses are among the wealthiest and most powerful organizations in the Imperium, second only to the Adeptus Mechanicus in their ability to operate independently of normal imperial authority. The Emperor's death affects them in complex ways. On one hand, the loss of the Astronomicon makes their services even more valuable as they become the only way to navigate certain routes through the warp. On the other hand, warp travel becomes more dangerous overall, with more ships being lost and fewer clients able to pay for navigator services. Navigator houses will likely play a crucial role in whatever successor states emerge from the Imperium's collapse. Their ability to provide even limited interstellar travel will make them kingmakers, able to choose which factions to support based on their own interests. Some navigator houses might declare independence entirely, establishing their own domains where they rule overtly rather than from the shadows. Others might ally with specific space marine chapters or planetary governors, offering navigation services in exchange for political protection and economic privileges. The balance of power will shift dramatically as organizations that once operated discreetly behind the scenes find themselves courted openly by every faction seeking to maintain any degree of interstellar capability. The rogue trader dynasties, merchant princes granted special imperial warrants to explore and exploit regions beyond the Imperium's borders, will find themselves in similar positions of unexpected power. These dynasties command their own private armies and fleets, operate outside normal imperial law, and have resources that rival entire sectors. In the chaos following the Emperor's death, the distinction between legitimate rogue trader and independent warlord will blur considerably. Some will continue serving the ideals of the Imperium, even without a functional central government, exploring new territories and establishing trade routes that might eventually help reunify humanity. Others will become conquerors in all but name, carving out personal empires in regions too distant for any authority to challenge them. The fate of the Imperial Navy and its vast fleets will significantly impact how the post-Emperor galaxy develops. The Navy is organized into sector fleets, each responsible for defending a region of space. These fleets are among the largest and most powerful military forces in the galaxy, capable of bombarding worlds into submission or destroying entire invasion forces. When central authority collapses, each sector fleet will effectively become an independent military force, and controlled by its admiral and senior officers. The decisions these leaders make will determine the fates of billions. Some admirals will attempt to maintain order in their sectors, using their fleets to protect trade routes, suppress piracy, and prevent chaos or Xenos incursions. They might declare themselves protectors or stewards rather than rulers, providing military security while allowing local governments to handle administration. Other admirals will see opportunity for personal advancement, using their fleets to conquer wealthy systems and establish themselves as warlords. Still others might simply try to keep their crews fed and their ships maintained, offering their services to whoever can pay while avoiding entangling political commitments. Thus, the Imperial Guard faces perhaps the most complex situation of any imperial institution. Guard regiments are recruited from their home worlds, indoctrinated with fanatical loyalty to the Emperor, then shipped off to fight in distant war zones where they usually remain for the rest of their lives. These regiments are scattered across the galaxy, often far from their homeworlds, organized under sector command structures that report ultimately to the High Lords of Terra. When Terra's authority collapses and the Emperor dies, what becomes of these regiments? Many will be stranded wherever they happen to be deployed, unable to return home even if they wanted to, and receiving no further orders or supplies from higher command. Some will continue fighting their existing enemies out of simple inertia, and because it's what they've always done, and they know no other life. Others will disintegrate as soldiers desert to return home or seek new lives. Still others will reorganize under their own officers, becoming mercenary forces that sell their services to local authorities. The more principled might offer their services, protecting vulnerable populations, becoming heroes of local legends. The less scrupulous might become bandits, using their military training and equipment to prey on civilians. The most coherent guard regiments might form the nucleus of new regional defense forces. A regiment of experienced soldiers, even one that's been cut off from support and supplies, represents significant military expertise. Local governments desperate for protection against the chaos erupting around them will court such regiments, or as offering resources and settlement rights in exchange for defensive services. Over time, these regiments might integrate into local societies, their soldiers marrying locals and raising children who grow up learning military skills alongside civilian trades. Several generations after the Emperor's death, the descendants of stranded guard regiments might have become warrior castes in new civilizations, maintaining military traditions whose origins they barely remember. The question of leadership in the post-Emperor Imperium cannot be overstated in its importance. The Imperium has not had active central leadership for 10,000 years, and the High Lords of Terra, who have governed in the Emperor's name, have always been bureaucrats and administrators, rather than charismatic leaders capable of inspiring loyalty during a crisis. When the Emperor dies and their claim to authority evaporates, who could possibly unite even a portion of the Imperium's fractured territories? The returned Primarchs, Guilliman and the Lion, are the most obvious candidates, but even they face significant limitations. Guilliman rules Ultramar effectively and has experience administering a large interstellar domain, but his personality is fundamentally bureaucratic and practical. He inspires respect rather than the kind of passionate devotion that sustains people through apocalyptic catastrophes. The Lion is a brilliant military strategist, but lacks Guilliman's administrative skills and has spent even less time in the current Imperium, making him even more disconnected from the populations he would need to lead. And both Primarchs together might be able to establish a successor state, encompassing several hundred or even thousands of systems. But unifying the entire Imperium under their leadership seems implausible, given the sheer scale of the disaster and the vast distances involved. Other Primarchs, if they were to return, might have different strengths and weaknesses as potential leaders. Vulcan, if he could be found and awakened from whatever state he exists in, has the common touch and genuine compassion that might allow him to connect with desperate populations in ways other Primarchs cannot. His emphasis on protecting humanity and his maker's mindset could help rebuild shattered worlds. Corvus Corax, operating from the shadows, might be better suited to guerrilla resistance against chaos or Xenos occupation rather than building new governments. Jagatai Khan's independent nature and emphasis on freedom might lead him to establish a more decentralized successor state that allows member worlds significant autonomy. The possibility exists that entirely new leaders might emerge, individuals who were unknown before the crisis, but who proved to have the vision, charisma, and capability to unite populations behind them. History provides numerous examples of such leaders arising during civilization-level catastrophes, and the Imperium's collapse would create perfect conditions for them. A planetary governor who successfully defends their world against overwhelming odds might become a rallying point for neighboring systems, and a military officer who manages to keep their fleet intact and uses it to protect civilian populations might become a hero to millions. A religious leader who offers hope and meaning in the chaos might gather followers across dozens of worlds. These emergent leaders would not need to be superhuman or possess any special lineage. In fact, their very humanity might be an advantage, making them more relatable and accessible than the distant Primarchs or the bureaucratic High Lords. A guard officer who rose through the ranks on merit, a tech priest who abandoned dogma to solve practical problems, a sister of battle who chose compassion over orthodoxy. Any of these might become symbols of a new way forward, representatives of what humanity could be rather than what the Imperium made it. The role of artificial intelligence in the post-Emperor Imperium raises disturbing questions. The Imperium has forbidden true AI since the Age of Strife, when the Men of Iron rebelled and nearly destroyed humanity. This prohibition has been so thoroughly enforced that even thinking about creating AI is considered heresy. But desperate times create desperate measures, and some factions cut off from imperial authority might reconsider this prohibition. If creating AI could help a world defend itself against chaos or tyranids, if it could solve logistical problems that would otherwise lead to starvation, would the prohibition still hold? The danger, of course, is that the prohibition exists for good reason. The Men of Iron were genuinely threatening, and the Age of Strife was genuinely catastrophic. Yet creating I might solve immediate problems only to create worse ones down the line. But human nature being what it is, someone somewhere will almost certainly try, especially if they can convince themselves their AI will be different, safer, more controlled than those of the past. The results could range from beneficial, if safeguards prove adequate, to catastrophic, if the Age of Strife's horrors repeat themselves. The cultural production of the post-Emperor Imperium will reflect the trauma and transformation of the era. Art, literature, music, all forms of creative expression will process the collective experience of watching their civilization collapse. Early works will likely be characterized by grief and nihilism, reflecting the immediate shock and despair of the emperor's death. Later generations might produce more hopeful works, of finding meaning in survival itself and celebrating the resilience that allowed humanity to endure. Eventually, the emperor's era might become mythologized, remembered not for its grim reality, but as a golden age when humanity was united and powerful, conveniently forgetting the suffering that characterized daily life for most imperial citizens. This mythologization could itself become politically significant. Factions claiming to restore the Imperium or continue its legacy will invoke these myths, using selective memory of the past to justify their present actions. They will emphasize the Imperium's unity and strength while downplaying its brutality and stagnation. They will claim to embody the Emperor's true vision while reinterpreting that vision to suit their interests. The struggle over historical memory and the right interpretation of the imperial legacy will be as important as military conflicts in determining the character of whatever civilizations emerge from the collapse. The philosophical implications of the Emperor's death will occupy thinkers for generations. The Emperor represented a particular vision of humanity's future, one based on unity, expansion, and the assertion of human supremacy over the galaxy. His death calls that vision into question fundamentally. Was it ever achievable? Were the costs worth paying? Should humanity pursue unity or embrace diversity? Should they seek to dominate the galaxy or simply find their place within it? These questions have no easy answers, but the necessity of answering them will drive intellectual ferment across the post-imperial worlds. Different philosophical schools will emerge, each offering competing visions of what humanity should become. Some will argue for a return to Enlightenment values of reason and science, claiming the Emperor's failure proves the superiority of skeptical inquiry over faith-based governance. Others will embrace mysticism and spirituality more deeply, arguing that humanity needs faith to survive, and that the Emperor's death simply means they must find new objects of devotion. Still others will advocate for radical transformation, arguing that baseline humanity is inadequate to the challenges the galaxy presents, and that survival requires accepting genetic modification, cybernetic enhancement, or even alliance with xenos species. These competing philosophies will not remain abstract, but will be tested in practice as different worlds experiment with different approaches. Some might attempt to recreate the Imperium structure on a smaller scale, complete with authoritarian governance and suppression of dissent, believing that only such measures can maintain order. Others might embrace democracy and individual liberty, hoping that freedom will unleash innovation and adaptability. Still others might develop entirely novel forms of social organization, hybrids of human political theory and xenos influences, or completely unprecedented systems born from unique circumstances. Or the long-term question is whether any human civilization that emerges from the Imperium's collapse can become stable and prosperous, or whether the galaxy's hostility dooms humanity to eternal struggle, regardless of how they organize themselves. The Imperium maintained a kind of stability for 10,000 years, albeit at tremendous cost in human suffering. Perhaps that was the best possible outcome, given the threats humanity faces. Or perhaps the Imperium's very structure created vulnerabilities and invited attacks that a different approach might have avoided. The answer will only become clear over centuries or millennia, as different approaches are tried and either succeed or fail. One possibility that deserves consideration is that humanity might not maintain political or cultural unity at all, that they might diverge into separate species over time. Isolated for centuries or millennia, subject to different evolutionary pressures and different intentional modifications, human populations on different worlds might eventually become so different that they can no longer interbreed or even recognize each other as the same species. The galaxy might eventually be home to dozens or hundreds of human subspecies, each adapted to their particular circumstances, each with their own culture and values, united only by distant common ancestry. This speciation would represent both loss and opportunity. The loss of unity, the failure of the Emperor's dream of one unified human civilization, would be profound. But the diversity might also represent resilience. If one branch of humanity falls to chaos or is consumed by tyrannids, and others might survive. If one approach to civilization proves maladaptive, others might thrive. The human family tree might branch as it did in the distant past, when multiple hominid species coexisted on Terra, and perhaps this time, the different branches might even learn to cooperate, rather than compete to extinction. The role of hope in all of this cannot be ignored. The Imperium has always been characterized by grinding despair barely held in check, by faith in the Emperor. His death removes that last bastion against nihilism for many. Yet humans are remarkably good at finding reasons to hope even in the darkest circumstances. Parents will hope for better futures for their children. Leaders will hope their decisions prove wise. Scientists will hope their research bears fruit. Artists will hope their work provides meaning. This hope, distributed across millions of individuals making billions of small choices, might achieve what grand strategies and mighty armies cannot, might preserve humanity's essence through the darkest times, and eventually guide them toward a better future. The Emperor himself might have understood this. For all his power and knowledge, he was ultimately just one being, limited by his own perspective and biases. His plans for the Webway project, his approach to handling the Primarchs, his dealings with Mars and the Navigator houses, all of these decisions made sense from his perspective, but contained flaws he could not see. Perhaps his death, terrible as it will be, represents an opportunity for humanity to move beyond the limitations of any single vision, as to embrace the chaos and creativity that comes from millions of minds working on the problem of survival, rather than one consciousness trying to plan everything. This is, perhaps, an overly optimistic reading of catastrophe. The more likely scenario involves tremendous suffering and death, the collapse of most of what the Imperium built, and centuries or millennia of dark age before anything resembling recovery becomes possible. But even in that grim scenario, humanity's survival is not guaranteed to be impossible. Humans are survivors. They have endured ice ages and volcanic winters, plagues and famines, wars and genocides. They have colonized every environment Terra offered and then spread across the stars. That resilience, that stubborn refusal to accept extinction, might be enough. The Emperor's death will test whether that resilience extends to surviving without the structure and guidance he provided for so long. It will test whether humans can rediscover the qualities that allowed them to survive before the Emperor unified them, the adaptability and innovation and cooperation that characterized humanity's rise from scattered tribes to spacefaring civilization. Those qualities were suppressed during the Imperium's reign, deemed heretical or unnecessary, in a civilization that valued obedience and tradition above all else. But they might still exist somewhere in humanity's genetic or cultural memory, waiting to be rediscovered when necessity demands. In the end, the question of what happens when the Emperor dies is really a question about humanity itself. Well, what are humans when stripped of the institutions and beliefs that have defined them for 10,000 years? What can they become when forced to adapt or die? What will they choose when confronted with the reality that the universe offers no guarantees of survival, no cosmic parent to protect them, no ultimate authority to tell them what to do? These are the questions that will be answered in the centuries and millennia following the Emperor's death. Answered not in words, but in action, in the countless decisions made by countless individuals, trying to survive in a galaxy that does not care whether they succeed. The Emperor's legacy will be complicated and contested for as long as humanity remembers him. Some will curse him for creating a civilization so dependent on his presence that it could not survive his absence. And others will honor him for the 10,000 years of protection he provided, for holding back the darkness as long as any being possibly could. Still others will see him as a tragic figure, a being of immense power and vision, who ultimately failed because his dreams were simply too large for reality to accommodate. But perhaps the most fitting legacy would be for humanity to survive, to adapt, to endure. Not as a unified empire spanning the galaxy, but as a species that continues despite everything the universe throws at it. Not as faithful servants following a divine plan, but as independent minds making their own choices and accepting responsibility for the consequences. Not as unchanging defenders of an idealized past, but as evolving beings adapting to an uncertain future. If humanity can achieve that, or if they can survive the Emperor's death and build something new from the ruins of the Imperium, then perhaps his sacrifice will have meant something after all. The galaxy will continue turning, regardless of humanity's fate. Stars will be born and die. Xenos empires will rise and fall. The Chaos gods will play their eternal games in the warp. the Tyranids will continue their advance from beyond the galactic rim. The Necrons will pursue their ancient agendas. In the cosmic scale, humanity is insignificant, a brief spark in the darkness that may flicker out without anyone noticing. But to humans themselves, their survival matters absolutely. It is everything. And they will fight for it, with whatever strength they have left, whatever resources they can muster, whatever hope they can kindle in the darkness. This is what it means for the Emperor to die. Not just the ending of one life, however significant, but the transformation of an entire civilization, the testing of an entire species, the beginning of a new chapter in humanity's story, whose ending cannot yet be known. It is the most significant event that could occur in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, an event so catastrophic and transformative that it would reshape the entire setting. And yet, it is also, in a sense, inevitable. Everything ends eventually. Even gods die. Even empires fall. Even the longest vigil must someday conclude. When that day comes, when the golden light finally goes dark and the 10,000-year watch ends, humanity will discover what it truly is beneath all the mythology and propaganda and institutional inertia. That discovery will be written in blood and fire, in courage and cowardice, in hope and despair. And whatever humanity becomes in the aftermath, whether it survives or falls, whether it rises or falls, it will be what they choose to become through their own actions rather than what the Emperor made them. That, perhaps, is the true meaning of the Emperor's death. Not just an ending, but a beginning. Not just a catastrophe, but an opportunity. Not just the death of a god, but the birth of a species that must finally learn to stand on its own. The galaxy will never be the same. Humanity will never be the same. But then again, nothing lasts forever. And perhaps it's time for something new to emerge from the ashes of the Imperium of man. Thank you for joining me on this exhaustive exploration of one of Warhammer 40k's most profound what-if scenarios. If you found this deep dive into the darkest possibilities of the setting valuable, please like and subscribe to the channel. There's always more to explore in this vast universe, more questions to ask, and more answers to pursue. Until next time, remember that in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But even in that eternal conflict, there are stories worth telling and possibilities worth imagining. The Emperor protects, at least for now, but what comes after might be even more interesting to explore. Stay curious, stay engaged, and I'll see you in the next video.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.